Hello everyone, dear friends. It's been a long time since I reviewed routers from Xiaomi. Because, in fact, there were no new products worthy of attention. But I can't ignore this router. Judging by its cost, as well as hardware and capabilities, I frankly think that in the near future this router will be the top router in terms of price-quality ratio. Judge for yourself. For $40 we get a router with support for Wi-Fi 6, with a maximum theoretical Wi-Fi speed of up to 3000 megabits per second due to two Wi-Fi bands of 2.4 and 5 GHz, dual-core A53 processor, 1.3 GHz, and 256 MB RAM. In addition, we will add support for the mesh network, the presence of an NFC chip, and work with IPTV out of the box. Let's take a closer look at all the capabilities of this router, see what's inside it, how to configure it, and also conduct tests for both range and speed. And also, compare it with other routers from Xiaomi. The router is delivered in a box like this. Xiaomi does not surprise you with anything here. Everything is pretty standard for packaging routers. A large image of the router, a small Xiaomi icon on the right side, and the model name Xiaomi Router AX3000T on the left side. The version of the router is Chinese, and this is a plus, which I will talk about a little later. On the back are the main advantages and capabilities of the router. Open the box. Since the router is made slightly at an angle, the stand is also made at an angle. From the package. Instructions in Chinese. We won't need it. Under the cardboard backing there is an Ethernet cable for connection. Length 1 meter. Not enough, but that's how it is. And the color could have been white. But it's not a problem. The power supply has a Chinese plug, but this is also not a problem. The seller included an adapter in the kit. Moreover, it is of fairly good quality and does not wobble. Cable length 1 meter. The power supply is 12 volts with a current of up to 1 ampere. In practice I measured about 0.3 amperes, or 5 watts from a 220 volt network. The plug is not quite standard, it is long and quite narrow. So if you were making a guaranteed power supply, then a plug like this, which is almost standard for Chinese devices, will not work. As an option, cut off the plug, or simply expand the connection socket in the router a little. Let's move on to the router itself. Carefully packaged in white cellophane. The design is quite interesting, especially the antenna design. The dimensions of the router are 225 by 172 by 208.8. At the same time, it is quite heavy. I'm more used to seeing thin folding and rotating antennas on Xiaomi routers. And here are quite thick antennas, with very good fixation of the angle of inclination with beveled upper edges. But unfortunately, you won't be able to rotate them, you can only align them perpendicular to the router's body. For antennas that operate according to the MU-MIMO 2x2 formula, that is, there may be a drop in speed when Wi-Fi devices are active. Our router is from Xiaomi, and not a subsidiary of Redmi, as the engraving on the case tells us. Also an innovation, Xiaomi usually did not make any markings on the router. Well, except for the sticker on the back. The entire upper part is made of perforated plastic for better cooling. NFC is engraved on the right side. It is to this corner that you will need to bring your phone to quickly connect your smartphone to your Wi-Fi network. On the front edge there is an LED indicating operation. It blinks orange if there is no connection and glows light blue. The left and right edges are smooth, but have small kickstands at the back. Let's move on to the back edge of the router. The first is a small hole with the router reset button. Next is the power connection socket. The router has 4 gigabit ports. As you can see, there are no designations where WAN, input from the provider, and where LAN is a local network. Here lies another big advantage of this router, and it is that you can connect two different providers and the router will automatically switch to a spare one if there is no network activity on the main one. In addition, thanks to port aggregation, we can connect 2 gigabit connections from one provider, and the router will already have 2 gigabit. The same can be done if you have NAS, home storage server, type devices with a 2 gigabit Ethernet connection. Great idea for a budget router. The downside is the lack of indication of network activity, a small thing, not a pleasant one. Next is another plus, namely the button to pair and add the router to the mesh network. We will talk about adding and creating a mesh network separately. For this, Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel and press the bell so as not to miss the video about building a mesh network on the AX3000T router. It's not for nothing that I bought 2 of them. Again, guys, we're talking about a router with a price tag of around $40. That is, it is a relatively budget router, but it has such capabilities as port aggregation and a mesh network. And I haven't run the tests yet. At the bottom of the router there is also perforated plastic, and here we see the main control board and a metal plate, which apparently gives weight to the router. There are also small plastic legs, since the router is designed for desktop installation. Unfortunately, the manufacturer, as always, did not provide holes for mounting on the wall. The sticker contains the designation of the router model, its name when first connected RD03_MINE_5815, as well as the serial number and MAC address of the device. Let's see what's inside and look at the characteristics of the router. If you carefully remove the sticker, there are a couple of screws underneath. We unscrew them and snap off the parts of the router. This is what our router looks like without the cover. The metal part is quite massive, but it serves as a heat sink from our board. This is the NFC module and it essentially occupies the entire lower right edge. And soldered wires went to our antennas. The wires are quite thick. The metal cooling plate is exactly 3 thicknesses. Thermal adhesives are present. By hardware. Wi-Fi standard, Wi-Fi 6, 802.11ax. Maximum Wi-Fi speed, up to 3000 megabits per second, 2976 megabits per second using 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz. Antenna tuning, 2+15 GHz antennas with extra range technology. Processor, dual-core A53, 1.3 GHz MediaTek Philogic 820. Connectable devices, up to 128 devices. RAM, 256 megabytes. This is where we have the MediaTek MT7976CN 2232 BMSL chip, part of the Wi-Fi radio module. 2.4 GHz 2x2 maximum 574 megabits per second. 5 GHz 2x2 2402 megabits per second. RAM is located in this compartment. This ESMT preliminary M15T2G16128 module is responsible for the RAM. And this is DDR3 SDRAM with a capacity of 256 megabytes. Nearby is the MediaTek MT7981BA2310AMAH chip, the main brains of our router. 1.3 GHz for smart home devices, also 2.4 and 5.0 GHz for Wi-Fi connections. It took some effort to remove the thermal protection from the switch. Moreover, there is a thermal pad both on one side and on the side of the heat sink plate. I don't think there's any risk of overheating. Gigabit switch based on MediaTek MT7531AE chip. The permanent memory chip is located on the other side of the board and is slightly worn out. Photos with enthusiasm show that this is a flash memory chip model F50L1G41LB with a capacity of 128 megabytes. Although the router is for the Chinese market and everything is in Chinese, setting it up is not difficult. Let's try to do this. After the first turn on, all we need to do is connect a cable from our provider. Next are 2 options or setup using a smartphone or laptop. Let's start with a smartphone. We connect to an open Wi-Fi network. It is called RD03_MINE and a set of numbers. We will immediately receive a notification from our router in a pop-up window. Let's open it. We agree with all points. Press the blue button. If you need a separate 5 GHz Wi-Fi network and 2.4 GHz, click on the top switch. Here we can rename our Wi-Fi network and enter the password for it. That's it. The basic settings are completed. Click the blue button and remember the login parameters. In 90% of cases, the router will configure itself and connect to the provider automatically. Now all we need is to find the changed Wi-Fi network in the list and enter the password you entered above. Internet access is already available, but we can also control the router through a mobile application. To do this, install and open the Mi Home application. Yes, a little unexpected. I thought the device could be controlled via the Mi Wi-Fi application, but the router refused to be added there. Click Add Device and enter AX300T or RD03. Or, in my case, the router was found automatically. Now enter the administrator password. This password is the same as the Wi-Fi network password if you did the initial setup as I showed above. Select the virtual room of the router and click Next. Here we can rename the router as desired. Let's go inside the plugin. Here we are immediately shown that everything is fine with the router's network connection. The reception and transmission speed is displayed in real time. Next we see that the router supports Wi-Fi Wi-Fi 6 and mesh network. There is a separate button for adding devices to the mesh network. We won't set up this network now, but in the next video I'll go into detail about this setup. Below is a list of connected devices. Going inside opens a detailed list of devices. Go to any device. Here we see the name of the device. We can rename it. We also see how much traffic the connected device consumed and when it connected to the router. Also below you can see the current download and upload speeds, as well as signal strength. We can enable a speed limit for each device. But to do this, you must first enable this setting globally. In the device information, you can set the device type, phone, tablet, TV. And also choose the manufacturer's brand. Below we see the connection type, the MAC address of the device and the IP address issued to it. From the main screen we can immediately see the name of our network and its password. If necessary, we can generate a QR code to connect another device to the Wi-Fi network. By going to the Wi-Fi settings, we can make a division into 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi. Rename the Wi-Fi network or change the password. Go to Advanced Wi-Fi settings. Here we can control how MU-MIMO is turned on and off. If some devices do not work well, we will enable compatibility with Wi-Fi 5. If necessary, disable the fast connection of devices. In the 2.4 GHz network settings, we can change the encryption method, signal strength, select the transmission channel and change the band. I recommend leaving these values at their defaults. In the 5 GHz Wi-Fi settings, they are almost identical. In the bandwidth settings we see the presence of 160 MHz. In the network connection settings, we can select the type of your connection to the internet provider. Here you can choose to connect to the provider using a login with a password, connect with a static IP address, select access point mode or switch the router to repeater mode, Wi-Fi signal amplifier. In WAN port mode, automatic mode is enabled by default. But you can forcefully switch the WAN port to another. This is convenient if, say, two internet providers are connected, and one has lost access to the internet. You can manually switch to another provider if the router does not do this automatically. In the network information we get information about the IP address received by the router from the provider. In the router settings, we can again get into the network settings. We can set the router restart time. You can set it either daily or once. I honestly don't know why this function is needed. Xiaomi routers work quite stably. I recommend changing the administrator password and making it different from the Wi-Fi network password. You can immediately reboot the router. Updates are installed in one click. For this purpose, there is an update assistant in the settings. Although the router is quite new, the firmware is already 1.0.47 at the time of the review. By clicking the button we can start the update process. You can also turn automatic updates on or off. By default it is turned on at 4 AM. We can also reset the router to factory settings. If the router LED bothers you, then we can either turn it off completely or set a time when to turn it off and when to turn it on. Convenient features. IPTV is turned off by default, so if you use this service, you need to turn it on. NFC for quickly connecting devices can be disabled. But if the router is for home, then in order not to tell everyone the network password, it's easier to leave it turned on. In the port aggregation settings, we can enable this function. Now we select two ports that will participate in aggregation to increase speed. That is, theoretically we can make a 2 gigabit connection. In the next menu, we can configure the QoS/QoS function, quality of service, level of service and maintenance, a technology for specifying service priorities for different types of traffic. That is, QoS is a technology that can guarantee the full passage of a certain type of traffic in given technological areas. We can set a speed limit, select the priority of traffic, games, video stream or web browser. Speed limiting for the guest network also becomes available. In the next menu we can check the Wi-Fi quality and optimize if necessary. I was faced with the need to change the channel so that it would not coincide with the connected routers. Another interesting menu is router applications. Here we can set a timer for when to turn Wi-Fi on or off. It is also possible to create a guest Wi-Fi network. Frankly, I was a little upset when I didn't find this function in the settings. We turn on the guest Wi-Fi network, indicating its name and password. We can also choose an encryption mode, or even make passwordless access, although I wouldn't recommend it. If necessary, we can set the operating period of the guest network from 1 hour to 1 day or indefinitely. Interesting anti-burglary setting. Enabled by default. We can block various clients. I won't go into detail. in general, everything is clear. Some devices support WPS connection in which there is no need to enter a password for the Wi-Fi network. By default the function is disabled, but if you have a printer or other devices that support this function. There are 3 functions with the Chinese language, I will not touch them. Also for advanced users it is possible to change hosts, this is the binding of the IP address and domain name. Sometimes useful, but only for advanced users. The last feature is family internet access protection. We choose an avatar, choose a device that needs to be protected from negative content on the internet. In the main settings we can rename the device, change the location, and view information about the device. Let's look at the options for setting up router management via a web browser. When connecting to Wi-Fi, Windows warned that our Wi-Fi is the newest and fastest, Wi-Fi 6. By default, the device's IP address is in 31 subnets. We enter 192.168.31.1 and get into the administrative panel of our router. The login will be admin, and the default password after the initial setup is the password you entered for the Wi-Fi network. But it can be changed, but more on that later. The interface opened, but everything was in Chinese. It's not very good, but it's not a problem either. I use the Chrome browser, and to translate all I need to do is right-click to translate. You can choose the translation language yourself. In the main window we see the status of the router, the name and passwords of the Wi-Fi network, as well as the number of clients on these bands. By clicking on the button with connected devices, we see a list of connected devices. And literally in one click we can disable them from accessing the World Wide Web, while the local network will be available. By clicking on the Earth icon, we get information about connecting to the internet, and we can also set a limit bar for downloading and uploading. At the top line of the notifications there was a reminder that there is new firmware for the router. Let's go to the main settings. Here we can change the checkbox and divide the 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi networks into separate subnets. For each range we can choose our own transmission channel, its width and strength. If you have a lot of old devices that may not see Wi-Fi 6, then you should enable the option to switch to Wi-Fi 5. Below there is another useful option, TWT Energy Saving Mode. Enabling this option will allow smartphones connected using Wi-Fi 6 technology to access the router much less often, but at the same time do not lose connection to save smartphone battery power. I happily recommend leaving MUMIMO and Connect enabled. Go to the Internet connection settings. We can change the connection type to PPPoE or select a static IP address. We can also select our DNS servers and change the MAC address of the router. Some providers strictly bind the router to the MAC address, and a new one cannot be connected without calling the operator. We can switch the operating mode to wired or wireless Wi-Fi repeater mode. WAN port management is also present. In the security settings we can create white or black lists. After the first connection, I strongly recommend changing the administrator password so that it is different from the password of your Wi-Fi network. In the LAN network settings, we can change the subnet and the starting and ending pool of local IP addresses. And also make a rigid binding of the received IP address and the MAC address of the connected device. Go to the system settings of the router. Here you can turn the indicator on the front panel on or off. You can check the firmware status and update it if necessary. Get the log of the router, reboot or backup the settings. We can immediately restore the router settings from another backup. We can also install plugins, select the time and time zone, and also control whether NFC connections are turned on or off. Let's go to the advanced settings of the router. First of all, we get to the QoS settings menu, a technology for providing different classes of traffic with different service priorities. And also speed limits if they are important to you. For home use I don't see the need for this setting. We can set the maximum download and upload speed for each device, and also set speed limits for the guest Wi-Fi network. In the DDNS settings we can choose from 4 providers of this service and, if necessary, enable this function. In the port reassignment settings, change or create router port reassignment rules accordingly. Enabling the DMZ feature can map the IP address of a device on the internal network to the external network, making it easier to access the device from the external network. If you use a VPN connection service, then in this section you can connect providers of this service. If you have more than 2 internet connection providers, then I highly recommend setting up the dual WAN port function. When you enable this function, aggregated WAN ports are enabled by default, which allows you to get speeds of up to 2 gigabits per second. That is, the speed of one provider plus the speed of the second provider. But we can also select the main provider, for example, on the first WAN port, and the backup one will be on the second, or vice versa. Once again, the router costs about $40 and has the ability to connect a backup provider or incoming port aggregation. Xiaomi never ceases to amaze me. Previous routers from Xiaomi had problems with IPTV. Often it simply did not work and we had to reflash the router with third-party firmware. Now you can simply enable this feature in the settings. You can also enable aggregation for LAN ports. In theory, the connection speed will be 2 gigabits per second. For connecting home file storage is acceptable. We'll talk about mesh connection in the next video. As you can see, the function is placed in a separate menu. In the router management menu we can rename it, update the firmware or download the MIA app for management. You can reboot or exit the setup session. In general, except for port aggregation and mesh, all settings are identical to previous routers from Xiaomi. My tariff plan provides a speed of no more than 700 megabits per second. There is no point in checking a wired connection, but Wi-Fi will be interesting. As you can see, the speed is slightly lower, 650 megabits per second for downloading and 700 megabits per second for uploading. We have 2 computers. On one of them we will launch the APRF server, and on the second we will measure the speed. All this happens on the same local network, which means that we can find out the speed of direct connection and data transfer. First of all, let's check the wired connection. The server and the PC under test are connected to the router using an Ethernet cable. We run the connection command and test the download speed APRF 3C192.168.1.143, as we can see the speed was 879 for download and upload. Let's perform the reverse test. For the upload speed, the command with the R key, the speed was 786 Mbit/s. This is in a single-threaded version. Now we'll make 5 streams. Here too the stream speed is on average 186 Mbit/s and the total value is 933/933 for downloading and uploading. Let's do the same with the reverse key R, and the total value is 84.5 for loading and uploading. Now we disconnect the cable from our client. The server is connected to the router via an Ethernet cable and we will conduct Wi-Fi speed tests. We run the command to connect and test the download speed APRF 3C192.168.1.143. As we can see, the speed was 879 for download and upload. Let's perform the reverse test. For the upload speed, the command with the R key, the speed was 786 Mbit/s. This is in a single-threaded version. Now we'll make 5 streams. Here the stream speed is also on average 186 Mbit/s and the total value is 933 for downloading and uploading. We will do the same for the reverse key R, the total value is 845 for download and upload. Speed readings are practically no different from wired internet speeds. 900 megabits per second over Wi-Fi is very cool for a budget router. I'll tell you a little secret why you should buy a Xiaomi router for the Chinese market. The secret is that there are no restrictions on transmitter power, as in Europe. There are also no strong restrictions on channels of use, which allows you to choose a channel that will be inaccessible to European routers and thereby reduce interference from neighboring routers. We will perform a range test using 2 routers from Xiaomi. These are my 2 well-proven routers, Xiaomi Mi 3G and Xiaomi Redmi AC2100. All of them are flashed with ASUS firmware and configured for maximum power. The routers will be located at one point with a short distance from each other. Within the house the signal strength is like this. Now I'm in the next room. So I crossed one room, there were 2 walls between me and the routers. Now I have gone down to the first floor and am in the farthest room. Between us there are 2 walls and a ceiling. I went out into the street and will take measurements moving away from the house. There will be 1 wall of the house between us. This is what the signal information looks like 15 meters from the house. I move a little further than 25 meters. At 35 meters the signal strength is almost the same. At 55 meters, the AX3000T takes the lead. The maximum distance was 65 meters. In the 2.4 GHz range, the 3G router completely disappeared and the AX2100 barely managed to get through. But the AX3000T still kept in touch. I thought there would be no signal in the 5 GHz range, but it was almost on the same level as 2.4 GHz. GHz. The AX2100 router also appeared at 5 GHz, but the signal strength was weaker than that of the AX3000T. In terms of price/quality ratio, I can really call this router the best among its competitors. Fully complies with all declared characteristics. Setting up and managing everything is quite simple, especially from the mobile application. The ability to connect two providers and create mesh networks, and this at a price of about $40. Almost a gigabit channel when using Wi-Fi. 993 megabits per second is also a huge plus. Here I can classify the characteristic of 2x2 antennas as a disadvantage, for by 2 would be better. But at the same time, the range of the router is beyond all praise. Previously, I ranked the range and power of the reflashed AC2100 as a top router, but the AX3000T slightly surpassed it. The ability to connect via NFC is a small thing, but also nice. In the next video I will analyze in detail the possibility of building a mesh network. We will check the speed and quality of work. I hope the video was useful to you and was able to reveal all the capabilities of this router. Please don't forget to like the video if you like it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other interesting videos about smart and not so smart home systems. You will find all links to products in the description under the video. There is also a link to a Telegram group where you will find not only new products on the smart home system, but also promotional coupons and other communication and answers to questions. All the best to everyone, peaceful skies and goodness. Bye bye.